By order of the Peaky Blinders. If you've seen the hit BBC series, you know that line. Cillian Murphy's Tommy Shelby, razor blades hidden in his flat cap, running a criminal empire across post-World War I England. It's stylish, it's gripping, it's mostly fiction. But here's the thing, the Peaky Blinders were real. They terrorized Birmingham for decades. They killed police officers in broad daylight. They made the streets so dangerous that ordinary people feared to walk them. Today, we're separating fact from fiction. Who were the real Peaky Blinders? What did they actually do? And how does the truth compare to the legend we see on screen? This is the true story of Birmingham's most notorious gang. Birmingham, 1880s, a city in crisis. Picture this. It's the 1880s and Birmingham is booming. The Industrial Revolution has transformed this middling city into one of Britain's great manufacturing centers. Factories pump out goods, money flows, but not to everyone. In the slums of Small Heath, thousands live in crushing poverty. Young men have few prospects. The streets are packed with people who have nothing and nothing to lose. This wasn't unique to Birmingham. Across industrial Britain, gangs were forming in response to economic desperation. In Birmingham, they called them slogging gangs, named for their brutal fighting style. But one gang would become more infamous than all the others, the Peaky Blinders. The name. So where does Peaky Blinders actually come from? The TV show tells you they hid razor blades in their caps. Dramatic, right? Wrong. Historian Carl Chin, who literally wrote the book on the real Peaky Blinders, explains the truth. Peaky simply referred to their flat caps with peaks. And blinder? That was Birmingham slang for someone who looked sharp, striking enough to blind you with their style. The razor blade story? Complete fiction. Disposable razor blades weren't even introduced in Britain until 1908, by which time the gang was already in decline. Plus, these were expensive luxury items. Poor street criminals weren't wasting money sewing them into caps. The real origin is actually more interesting. These young men took pride in their appearance. In a world that treated them as worthless, their style was a statement. First Blood, March 23, 1890. The Peaky Blinders name first appeared in print on March 24, 1890. In the Birmingham Mail, the headline, "A Murderous Outrage at Small Heath." The story, a young man named George Eastwood walked into the Rainbow Public House on Adderley Street. He ordered a bottle of ginger beer. He was a teetotaler, didn't drink alcohol. In walked several men from the neighborhood. They took one look at Eastwood with his non-alcoholic drink and decided to make an example of him. Led by a thug named Thomas Mucklow, they beat him savagely with their belt buckles. The weapon of choice for these gangs. Eastwood's skull was fractured. He barely survived. Days later, the attackers sent letters to national newspapers, announcing themselves to the world. We are the Peaky Blinders. The real Tommy Shelby? Let's address the elephant in the room. Thomas Shelby never existed. The Shelby family? Fiction. But there was a leader who came closest to the Tommy Shelby character, Thomas Gilbert, who went by multiple aliases but was most commonly known as Kevin Mooney. Gilbert routinely changed his last name to avoid police detection. He was considered the most powerful member of the Peaky Blinders. Historian accounts describe him as the man who organized the gang's territorial expansion and oversaw their land grabs across Birmingham. But here's the key difference. The real Peaky Blinders weren't one unified family. They were multiple loose gangs who adopted the same style and name. Thomas Gilbert was prominent, but he didn't have the centralized control Tommy Shelby wields on screen. The faces behind the legend. The real gang members. They were young, very young. David Taylor, arrested at age 13 for carrying a loaded firearm. Harry Fowles, known as Baby-Faced Harry, arrested at 19 for bicycle theft. Ernest Haynes and Stephen McNichol, arrested together, described by police as foul-mouthed young men who stalk the streets in drunken groups, insulting and mugging passers-by. These weren't sophisticated masterminds. They were teenagers and 20-somethings from working-class backgrounds, many holding legitimate jobs during the day. Some were as young as 12 years old. The West Midlands Police Museum still has their mugshots. Looking at them, you don't see hardened criminals. You see boys. Boys who happen to be extremely dangerous. The style. But here's where the TV show got it right. These guys could dress. Their signature look included tailored jackets and overcoats, bell-bottom trousers, buttoned waistcoats, silk scarves, metal-tipped leather boots, and of course, those peaked flat caps worn at jaunty angles. This wasn't normal for street gangs. Most criminals dressed like poor criminals. The Peaky Blinders made fashion a weapon. When you saw that distinctive style walking toward you on a Birmingham street, you knew trouble was coming. Even their girlfriends and wives got in on it, wearing lavish clothing, pearls, and colorful scarves, funded, of course, by the gang's criminal activities. What they actually did. So what were the real Peaky Blinders actually up to? Let's be clear. This wasn't The Godfather. This was street-level crime, brutal and indiscriminate. Their bread and butter, robbery and pickpocketing, illegal gambling and bookmaking, protection rackets, land grabs, fighting other gangs for control of territory, assault and intimidation. The historian Heather Shore from the University of Leeds puts it bluntly. The Peaky Blinders were more focused on street fighting and robbery than organized crime. They weren't building criminal empires. They were surviving day to day through violence and theft. Their weapons. Forget the razor blade caps. The real Peaky Blinders' weapon of choice? Their belts. They'd whip them off their waists, wrap them around their fists, and swing the heavy buckles like flails. Police reports from the era consistently mention these belt-buckle attacks. They could cause devastating injuries. They also used metal-tipped boots for kicking and stomping, knives and canes, fire irons, Webley revolvers when they could get them. In September 1905, a Peaky Blinder named William Lacey shot and killed a member of the rival Summerhill gang. Violence wasn't just their business, it was their language. Constable baiting. But the Peaky Blinders didn't just target civilians and rival gangs. They deliberately went after police officers in what became known as constable baiting. The most notorious incident, July 19, 1897. Police Constable George Snipe and his colleague encountered 6 or 7 Peaky Blinders on Bridge Street West. The gang had been drinking all day. When Snipe tried to arrest 23-year-old William Coleraine for using obscene language, his friends intervened. What happened next shocked Birmingham. One of them, 19-year-old George Cloggy Williams, threw a brick at Constable Snipe's head with such force that it fractured his skull in 2 places. Snipe died the next morning. This was the 8th assault Snipe had suffered in just 6 years as a police officer. 8 times attacked by Birmingham's gangs. The 8th time killed him. Williams was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to life in penal servitude. But the damage was done. Police officers were terrified. Hundreds were injured by gangs. Some left the force entirely, unable to handle the violence. 4 years later, in 1901, the Peaky Blinders killed another constable, Charles Philip Gunter. The Birmingham Daily Mail published a desperate letter from a worker in 1898. Surely, all respectable and law-abiding citizens are sick of the very name of ruffianism in Birmingham and assaults on police. Controlling Birmingham. Through violence and bribery, the Peaky Blinders dominated their territories. They controlled valuable neighborhoods like Small Heath and Cheapside. They extorted money from businesses. They ran illegal gambling operations. And crucially, they bribed police officers. When authorities tried to crack down, gang members simply paid off corrupt cops to look the other way. This cycle of violence and corruption made them nearly untouchable throughout the 1890s. What Peaky Blinders gets wrong. Let's be clear, the TV show is brilliant television, but historically, it takes some creative liberties. Myth number 1, the razor blade caps. Busted. As we've covered, disposable razor blades weren't common until 1908, and there's zero evidence in police reports, court records, or witness testimonies of gang members using caps as weapons. Their preferred weapons were belt buckles and boots. Myth number 2, the timeline. Busted. The show is set in the 1920s. The real Peaky Blinders' heyday was the 1880s to 1900s. By 1920, they'd been defeated by the Birmingham Boys and had essentially disbanded. Myth number 3, the Shelby family. Completely fictional. Thomas, Arthur, John, Polly, none of them existed. Creator Stephen Knight invented them wholesale. The real gang wasn't a family operation. It was multiple loose groups of young criminals. Myth number 4, Tommy Shelby beats Billy Kimber. Opposite of truth. In reality, Billy Kimber and the Birmingham Boys defeated and replaced the Peaky Blinders. Kimber died in 1945 at age 63 from illness, not from a bullet to the head. Myth number 5, the scale of operations. Greatly exaggerated. The show portrays the Peaky Blinders as building an international criminal empire, dealing with the IRA, negotiating with politicians, expanding to America. The real gang? They were street thugs, focused on local territory, petty theft, and protection rackets. They never had that kind of reach or sophistication. Myth number 6, the glamour. Partially true. Yes, they dressed well. Yes, they were known for their style. But they were also described in police records as foul-mouthed thugs who beat innocent people for ordering ginger beer. They weren't charming anti-heroes. They were violent criminals who terrorized ordinary citizens. What the show gets right. To be fair, Peaky Blinders does nail some elements. The fashion sense, absolutely accurate. The gang violence and territorial disputes, very real. The protection rackets and bookmaking, core activities. The police corruption and bribery, major problem. The harsh economic conditions of post-industrial Birmingham, spot on. Billy Kimber as a major gangster controlling racecourses, 100% accurate. The rise of Irish police constables to combat the gangs happened. The show captures the atmosphere of the era brilliantly, even if the specific story is fictional. The details you won't find in the show. 1. They changed police fashion. When George "Cloggy" Williams killed Constable Snipe with a brick, police initially thought the spike on top of Snipe's helmet had been driven into his skull. Birmingham police officers refused to wear the spiked helmets anymore, fearing the same fate. This led to a complete redesign. The spike was replaced with a rounded crest, which West Midlands police still use today. The Peaky Blinders literally changed how British cops dress. 2. Many fought in World War I. Henry Lightfoot, the first person ever identified as a Peaky Blinder, joined the British Army 3 times and fought in the Battle of the Somme in 1916. Many gang members enlisted when war broke out in 1914. Some never returned. The war actually helped break up the gang by claiming many young lives. 3. Football saved Birmingham. One unexpected factor in the gang's decline? The rise of football. As youth clubs and sports programs appeared across Birmingham in the early 1900s, young men had new outlets for their energy and frustration. Clubs like Aston Villa and Birmingham City, originally Small Heath Alliance, saw a surge in talent. Instead of joining gangs, boys joined football teams. The first modern youth cult. Historian Andrew Davies calls the Peaky Blinders the first modern youth cult. Their distinctive clothing, their own slang, their sense of style and identity, they were precursors to 20th century movements like Teddy Boys, Mods, and Punks. They weren't just a gang. They were a subculture. Not all were unemployed. Contrary to assumptions, many Peaky Blinders held regular jobs. Thomas Gilbert worked as a brass caster. George Williams had an employer who described him as very industrious. They committed crimes at night and on weekends, but during the day, they were working men. Their criminal activities were a supplement, not their full-time occupation. How the gang changed the city. The Peaky Blinders' impact on Birmingham went far beyond their criminal activities. Terror in the streets. For decades, ordinary Birmingham residents lived in fear. The 1898 letter to the Birmingham Daily Mail captures the mood. People were sick of the very name of ruffianism. Walking through certain neighborhoods meant risking robbery, assault, or worse. The gang's violence didn't just hurt their victims, it traumatized an entire city. Police reform. The murders of Constables Snipe and Gunter, and hundreds of other attacks on officers, forced Birmingham to completely rethink policing. The hiring of Charles Houghton Rafter, increased penalties, and community engagement strategies. These became models for dealing with urban gang violence across Britain. Economic impact. The gang's protection rackets and extortion drained money from legitimate businesses. Their control of gambling and bookmaking created shadow economies. For businesses operating in Peaky Blinder territory, the gang tax was just a cost of doing business. Cultural legacy. Paradoxically, the Peaky Blinders have become a source of Birmingham pride. The Black Country Living Museum now features exhibits on the gang. Tours take visitors through historic Peaky Blinder locations. The TV show has made the gang's name globally famous. Birmingham has embraced this dark chapter of its history, transforming street criminals into cultural icons. Social reform. The gang's existence highlighted the desperate poverty in industrial Birmingham. Their rise was a symptom of economic inequality, lack of opportunity, and social breakdown. Reformers used the gang as evidence that Britain needed better education, youth programs, and social services. In a strange way, the Peaky Blinders helped make the case for the welfare state. The real story versus the legend. So here's the truth. The real Peaky Blinders weren't masterminds building criminal empires. They weren't charming anti-heroes fighting for their class. They were young men, often boys, born into grinding poverty in one of Britain's industrial cities. They formed gangs, dressed sharp to claim dignity in a world that offered them none, and carved out territory through violence and intimidation. They robbed people. They beat people. They killed police officers. They terrorized Birmingham for 3 decades. By 1920, they were defeated by a better organized gang and faded into history. The name lived on as slang, but the actual Peaky Blinders were gone. Lessons from the past. What can we learn from the real Peaky Blinders? First, poverty and hopelessness breed violence. These weren't evil people. They were desperate people in desperate circumstances who made violent choices. Second, style matters. The Peaky Blinders understood that appearance is power. In a world that dismissed them as worthless, they demanded to be noticed. Third, organized crime emerges from social breakdown. When legitimate opportunities disappear, people create illegal ones. The Peaky Blinders were a symptom of industrial capitalism's failures. And finally, history is more complex than legends. The real story is messier, less heroic, and more tragic than any TV show. But it's also more interesting. The Peaky Blinders were real. Their violence was real. Their impact on Birmingham was real. But they weren't the sophisticated criminals we see on TV. They were street thugs, young and violent, shaped by poverty and desperation into something dangerous. They rose from Birmingham's slums, terrorized the city for decades, and were eventually defeated, not by heroes, but by a rival gang that was simply better organized. By order of the Peaky Blinders? In reality, their orders didn't reach very far at all. But their story, the real story, is fascinating enough without embellishment. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the real Peaky Blinders, hit that like button and subscribe for more history content that separates fact from fiction. And remember, the next time you see Tommy Shelby on screen, razor blade cap and all, you'll know the real history behind the legend.